So hello there, and welcome to the next one of my spooky reads. I'm bringing you another favorite from my childhood. This one is Jane Emily by Patricia Clapp. And I was trying to remember when I first read this and how I got it, and I cannot remember. I don't remember when I didn't love this book. But this is probably the beginning of my mild obsession with Gothics. It's maybe the first one I read, although I also read Rebecca when I was pretty young, and some very cheesy Gothic romances that I don't remember because they're not considered classics by anybody's standards, and they were things I picked up at used bookstores. But Jane Emily, Patricia Clapp. So besides fueling my taste for Gothic, this one has a child ghost. And oh boy, do I love evil children. Evil children in stories get me every time. Like, when you're watching the zombie movie and the little girl comes in with her blonde hair hanging over her face and she looks up and she's evil. It's wonderful. It gets me every single time. Maybe because I spend so much of my time and energy with children because I'm a middle school teacher by day. And I know that a child who is still is an unnatural beast. Totally scary. So Jane Emily follows a couple of young people. We've got Louisa, who is our main character and narrator, and she's a young woman. I'm not actually sure how old she is, but she's marriageable, so she's probably like 16, maybe as old as 20, right? And there's a younger girl in her life, Jane, who has had some misfortunes in her life. She lost both of her parents and she's been adopted by Louisa's family and is being raised as kind of a little sister with her. And they're close and everything is good. And they get an invitation to go visit Jane's grandmother. And Jane wants Louisa, or I forget actually if it's Jane or if it's the grandmother, but somebody wants Louisa to go too. Because, if you've ever tried to take care of an 8-year-old, it does take some energy. Maybe grandma's not quite up for that herself. And plus, the story needs Louisa to be there. And it takes almost no time for the creep factor to start to come in. Even though grandma's house is not scary, it's not like some abandoned ruin out on the moors. It's a lovely home. We find out soon that Jane is staying in a bedroom that used to belong to Emily, who was a daughter of the house who died when she was 12 years old. And everything we hear about Emily is just a little off. Even her own mother, when she talks about her, talks about how she was difficult and demanding. And it's just not the way you usually hear a mother who's lost a child talking about her lost child. So one of the things that always got me definitely when I was a kid was the gazing ball, because the ghost is kind of centered around this gazing ball that's out in the garden. So I'm going to read you a couple of pages from an interaction with that reflecting ball or gazing ball. So Jane is out in the garden with Louisa when this happens. Most of all, she was fascinated by the reflecting ball. It used to be Emily's, she told me. Emily wouldn't let anyone else look in it, ever. How do you know that? Katie told me. Katie thinks it's marked with evil. Jane, what a thing to say. I didn't say it, Katie did. Katie says no good ever came from anything that doesn't show the truth. And doesn't the reflecting ball show the truth? We were in the garden, and I was trying lackadaisically to write a letter to Martin. Jane went close to the silver ball, putting her face down near it. I guess not, she said and giggled. A lovely sound. I look like a frog, and I know I'm not a frog, but I have a flat nose and bulgy eyes and a big wide mouth. She stood staring into the silvery surface, making ridiculous faces and giggling at the reflection. I can look like lots of people, she said. She puffed out her rosy cheeks. Now I look like Queen Victoria. I laughed at her. How do you know what Queen Victoria looked like? I've seen pictures, of course. She opened her eyes wide and tipped her head down slightly, looking upward into the ball through her dark lashes. Now I look like Emily. Where did you see a picture of Emily? I asked lazily. I could feel the sun warm on my head, and I felt pleasantly drowsy. After a moment, I realized Jane had not answered. Where did you see Emily's picture? I repeated. Jane stepped backward, away from the ball, her face very still. I never did, she said softly. You must have, else how could you know you looked like her? I never did, she said again, and suddenly her voice was angry. I never saw a picture of Emily, but I looked like her. I know I did. She came quickly to my chair, standing close beside it, her eyes stormy. Well, all right, dear, I said in surprise. As you told me, you can look like all sorts of people in the ball. Queen Victoria and a frog? Why not Emily, too? I put my unfinished letter and box of writing materials aside. Let's see who I shall look like, shall I? Maybe I can be President Taft. No, I don't want you to, Louisa. Anything. Anyway, you're just being silly about it. You couldn't look anything like President Taft, and I did look like Emily, so there. She stood a moment, her face flushed and her breath coming quickly. Then she buried her face in my shoulder, hugging me tight. I'm sorry, Louisa, I'm sorry. I don't know why. I didn't mean to talk like that. She sounded deeply disturbed, and it puzzled me, but I thought it perhaps better to drop the whole subject. Now, of course, that's not a subject that stays dropped. It comes back around, and the ghost of Emily and her influence over Jane and saving her. And of course, we have a romance because how could you not, right? So Jane Emily, a short for a Gothic romance. See, it's only about this wide. And this actually includes a second work from Patricia Clapp called Witches' Children, which is a take on the Salem witch trials and who was a part of that. Another good book, by the way. So thank you for listening.